Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to be here. This is something that I'm very passionate about and always stoked to talk to folks about. And that is really building the confidence to start practicing accessibility research. Um, and I won't beat around the bush too much, but let's get a few things out of the way before we dive in. One of those things is that I think as practitioners in accessibility and in kind of the larger conversations that we have in accessibility, especially as of late, I think it's very clear that if we really want to move beyond compliance, that really requires us to do user-centered, inclusive research, not just making accessible experiences that are compliant, but making sure that the experiences truly work for assistive technology users. And that's really the only way that we're going to ensure that barriers that kind of come up that are sort of unforeseen and don't really connect to any sort of check or automated way of double checking compliance can really do. And that's really just to test with our users. And the reason that I feel strongly about this is that I'm a big believer that inclusive design practices, inclusive research practices are really able to prevent accessibility issues down the road. That's things like having the opportunity to include accessibility testing when you actually are designing and building digital products. That really allows the engineering workload at the end to be reduced by preventing some of those accessibility issues down the road in production. That's something that we've seen in some research, but also leveraging existing research skills, methods, principles that might be a part of folks that are in that discipline of research or UX, but also designers, developers, people that are building web and digital experiences can apply their skills and their methods to learn from AT users. And that's something that I really hope for you to leave this talk with today is that you can really leverage a lot of the things you might already know and already feel confident in, either within the teams that you work with and within yourself as well, to really make sure that you're building digital experiences that are truly usable and not just accessible. And when I'm talking about kind of inclusive design, UX research, without kind of making it too complicated for us, what that really is a series of design and research methods that focus on understanding and enabling people of all backgrounds and abilities. And so when we take that kind of method and approach that sort of lives in the world of UX, and we really apply that to accessibility, what that means is actually treating assistive technology users, people with disabilities who are using things like screen readers, screen magnification, alternative navigation tools, alternative navigation being any of those other assistive technology that can kind of support operating as your mouse and keyboard. These users are navigating the web and don't use typical inputs and outputs, but are experiencing things in their own unique way. And so treating them as a user group that we really want to dive into building an understanding of what their challenges are, how they use their assistive technology is really how we unlock a lot of value from the inclusive research we're doing and actually truly make sure the experiences are accessible as well. For me, inclusive research is sort of the difference between thinking about tackling accessibility or tackling inclusion by thinking like maybe I'll take the perspective of a user, maybe I'll explore assistive technology, or maybe I'll check if this works with a screen reader by just pretending I'm a screen reader and testing the experience. And while those things are really part of that like wider learning experience, they're also not as helpful as actually getting that perspective from the users themselves who have that expertise about how their assistive technology works and how they actually might be challenging for them to navigate an experience due to the way that it works. And so through inclusive research, we can actually help teams kind of build that empathy for the breadth of diverse challenges that these users can face. And that is really how we empower the innovative ideas and solutions that not only benefit the testers or folks that use assistive technology, but everyone who can kind of benefit from these innovations. So, I mean, it's not some news or anything, but definitely through applying inclusive design and approaching innovation in this way, we've seen in our own recent memory many different features that were maybe initially designed specifically for people with disabilities, things like captions, dark mode. These were all kind of built with that user group in mind, but are clearly loved and appreciated by a wide range of people outside of people with disabilities as well, or even situationally, depending on the needs that you are navigating. And so making sure that we are thinking not only about the opportunity to make experiences that are accessible and compliant, but also can foster this, innovation that leads to a more usable and truly inclusive experience for everyone is a huge win that can also come from doing this research. And so, with all of that said, I think it's understandable that there's a lot of value to be gained by doing this work. And that work being doing research with assistive technology users, with people with disabilities, and using that as a way to learn and build better experiences. But there's a clear lack of this, especially in the world of accessibility. We don't see as much of practitioners who are not maybe dialed into the world of accessibility practicing this. And there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, it's clear that this is something that's very new. It can feel very daunting as a result for practitioners who are getting started, who, might not really have a lot of experience working with people with disabilities or assistive technology. And that can really strain their ability to feel like they can actually use their skills to help represent that user's voice. There's also the element that assistive technology itself can add this, huge beast into the situation that feels overwhelming and difficult to understand, especially if you yourself are not an assistive technology user. And that adds that kind of intimidation and complexity. And then there's also the challenge of maybe I know that, yes, my skills could be applied here to doing inclusive research, but how do I actually adapt my design methods, my research methods to really practice meaningful inclusion? It feels kind of like a huge kind of wall that's in front of us, all these different barriers. And it's understandable that it feels a bit daunting to get started. And so that's really what brought me to this talk today and what motivated me to kind of put something like this together was that I really want you to walk away with an understanding of how you can overcome some of the barriers we've already talked about to getting started and actually explore strategies that will help you overcome those common barriers and really feel like you can get started today, in fact. Um, I also want you to connect with some strategies that kind of tackle the piece of building that confidence to do it, which is different than just overcoming the barriers, but actually building that confidence to apply your skills to inclusive research with AT users. And I want to leave you with some tips that I feel really impact um, the sessions of research to make sure that they're high impact, make sure that they really empower participants to feel empowered to share by creating that truly inclusive learning space and research space. So, we've already kind of digested a little bit here. And so I'll just take this moment to introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Kavana Ramesh, as mentioned, and my focus has been I've been a UX researcher for 5 years. I've also focused primarily on accessibility research for the last three, facilitating over kind of 500 plus, research study sessions with assistive technology users. And so it's just to say and share with you that I was in that position where I had a skill set and I didn't know how to transform that skill set into doing something like inclusive research or accessibility. And I felt just as kind of daunted and sort of confused about how to get started as so many other practitioners might feel. And so that was kind of my motivation to put this together. And I really feel confident that by advocating more for accessibly inclusive research through kind of applying your own skills already, we can get more people involved in accessibility, from designers to researchers to even like folks that work on kind of the product or development side when they're building digital experiences. And something else that I feel like was part of why I was excited to put this together is that I know a thing or two as somebody who is myself a late diagnosed ADHDer. I know what it's like to feel like something that you really want to do can feel just so overwhelming and daunting. It feels like this sort of big wall of evil that you have to sort of climb up and overcome. And so I really wanted to make this something that you can digest that doesn't have to feel scary. And we're going to do that by, as you may have seen on my first slide, there was a very cute graphic of a Krabby Patty burger, maybe cartoonish and yellow and vibrant with sesame seeds. And then we have on the left of it a kind of stack of all the different ingredients that go into building a burger. I myself am pretty new to eating meat. I was a long time pescatarian, only been eating meat for like 2 years. So I myself am still also learning how to build a burger. And so I thought we could break down some of the sort of learnings today into the steps of kind of building and putting together a burger. So what is sort of the first stage we have to tackle? Um, we'll have to prep our ingredients. Okay, prep our ingredients. What does that look like? Um, and just to call out at this point of the space, folks, that if you do have questions throughout, please feel free to drop them in. I'm going to try to tackle questions kind of on the fly as well, just to yeah, help people feel like they're engaging and they get their questions answered as we go through. But just that reminder to you now. So what does it look like to prep our ingredients to get started? So I'll kind of contextualize this in some different sort of things I've heard from practitioners, barriers that have come up. And one of them is maybe someone sharing, I don't know enough and I'm worried I might say something wrong in a session. How do I make sure I'm doing it right? And this is a very kind of valid, going back to those barriers we talked about, a valid sort of barrier or concern, because it can feel like it's difficult to get this work right. And if we're chasing trying to do it perfectly, there's a lot of things that can come in the way. Firstly, accessibility can seem just too technical to get started. It's like, oh, I need all this special knowledge about accessibility before I could possibly learn from an AT user or do any inclusive research. And that can kind of provide that sort of barrier too. But also that worry that there is kind of a right way is, I think, a lot of the times rooted in the fact that practitioners may not have that experience, right, with working with people with disabilities. And that just sort of reflects a larger can of worms, a larger societal issue. But I think that it's important for us to distance ourselves a little bit from trying to do things perfectly and right and really understand that vulnerability in that and actually being vulnerable about what you don't know and understand is a great launch pad for learning as well. Um, and for a lot of practitioners that want to get started in this, and for any of you folks that might be listening, if you care about inclusion, it seems too hard to do it right. It can feel like I value this community, I value this work, I want to do it perfectly, and that chase for perfect can really prevent you from feeling like you can get going. And I really, really deeply understand that. So, what can we do about that? I think these nuggets really are really all kind of related to sort of our mindset going into this, but I think they're important to sort of set our stage. And that is that, perfect is the enemy of good. We've heard that phrase before, but don't allow chasing that perfect approach to stop you from getting started. And for me, I think that reminder comes in the form of confidence that you'll build doing this work will really come from navigating failures, not just wins, and actually noticing how things aren't working and then figuring out ways to make them work better. Um, to that point of being open to learning by being transparent and open that, you may not be at a place where you understand a lot of what's going on, provides a better space for open dialogue and learning without judgment, rather than kind of critiquing or expecting those around you to do things right and sort of creating a space of judgment. Being open to the fact that people are in a progression of learning can be really helpful. And another activity that I kind of wanted to touch on here too is that when we're doing any of this type of work and we're trying to learn, I find that doing some of these things in a collective, in sort of a team, in a community of practitioners, can be really helpful. Something like creating that space for collective learning with something like a watch party where you're watching clips maybe of AT users interacting with your own web experiences or with other videos that we can find online to sort of support learning, create a space where you can pause, reflect, debrief, and try to understand things better together can be super helpful as well. And so that's kind of where we're beginning. Really simple. We're going to prep our ingredients by just starting that journey of getting oriented and learning by doing it together and doing it without judgment and sort of operating with that safe space for learning. All right, so we've got our burger, we've prepped our ingredients. So that's kind of like the portion of it where we've found all of the pieces that we want to put in. And so what does it look like to kind of move forward from there? Um, I would say we need to toast up our buns. I think that's a contentious next step. Some people might say they want you to grill your meat first, but I would say toast up your buns. And so, what does that look like? I'll kind of situate us again in something I've heard or a barrier that's sort of come up here. And it's maybe someone saying, I'm not sure how to follow along with the user and the assistive technology. How do I actually ask questions when the screen reader is talking to? I think this is a really key point of how assistive technology impacts facilitating any sort of moderated research session because assistive technology kind of acts like this other person in the room outside of the user that you might be working with. And it can be challenging to flag issues that are happening or blockers or hidden barriers even without that understanding of what is, sort of the expected behavior for that AT. And if you're a facilitator, oftentimes we're accustomed to being sort of the expert on the tech that we're exploring or testing or checking. And um, assistive technology sort of adds this additional layer of complexity that makes it so we're not as much of that expert. It's not really me that is able to speak to the real experiences of a screen reader user. It's going to be my screen reader user in that session with me who actually has that experience and expertise to draw from. And so shifting my mindset a bit into allowing your users, your participants who are themselves an assistive technology user and an expert on that, to be your sort of educator in that moment and be a window into learning more and building more understanding can be super impactful. And sort of to exemplify this for you all, I've got a really special treat of having a friend of mine, Noah, share with us kind of what I would do often in research sessions when we would work together. I would say at the start, hey Noah, I really need to kind of just get oriented to how your AT works and how I can navigate, or sorry, how you navigate with your AT. Could you give me kind of a demonstration of that? And that's something that is kind of an activity you can leverage both in research sessions, but also outside of them, just as a way to build your learning, depending on how and when you can access an assistive technology user, of course. But Noah was kind enough to share this with us, and I'll get this playing for us right now. Mindful of volume, and so I'll check in there if the volume is looking a little loud for folks.
Hi, everyone. My name.
Oh, and sorry, just a reminder that I didn't share is that Noah is a speech to text user. So his assistive technology is one that operates using his voice. And it's through that that he's able to navigate in the page. This is often a kind of an AT that falls under that umbrella, maybe of alternative navigation methods. And it's one that he can, yeah, use without having to use a mouse and keyboard at all, just totally through the voice. And he's going to share a little bit more about that with us.
name is Noah, and I've got chronic pain that affects my hands and limits how long I can use them. So I use speech recognition software on a computer. Today, I'm demonstrating how to use Apple's voice control, and I'm doing so on a Safari browser. So speech recognition software allows you to give verbal commands that the computer will then turn into actions. And you can do almost anything that you would do with a mouse and a keyboard. So if I wanted to scroll on the page, I could give a command, scroll down. If I wanted to go all the way to the top.
I'll just provide a few visual descriptors here that when Noah said scroll down, the Canadian Canada.ca website has kind of done like a partial scroll down.
I could say scroll to the top. And there are tons of other variations of commands just like that. Now, if I want to click on something, there are a variety of ways to do it. The easiest one is to just say click and then the name of the link or the button that you want to click on. That doesn't always work though. For example, if I want to click on the jobs link here, I can just say click jobs. And that's really easy, it's intuitive, and it's fast. Now, unfortunately,
Oh, sorry, just another pause to share that when Noah said click jobs, he did actually get to navigate to the jobs page. I'm just going to move ahead to make sure.
demonstrating how to use Apple's voice control, and I'm doing so on.
Sorry, folks, the video has restarted, so I'm just going to find where we were.
I could give a command, scroll down. If I wanted to go all the way to the top, I could say scroll to the top. And there are tons of other variations of commands just like that. Now, if I want to click on something, there are a variety of ways to do it. The easiest one is to just say click and then the name of the link or the button that you want to click on. That doesn't always work though. For example, if I want to click on the jobs link here, I can just say click jobs. And that's really easy, it's intuitive, and it's fast. Now, unfortunately, sometimes because of the way elements are coded, that command does not work. For example, if I try to click on this menu in the top left, click menu, nothing happens. And that's possibly because the accessible label of the menu is not correctly implemented. In that case, with speech recognition software, what you can do is use a different command that instead adds a numbered label on everything on the screen that can be clicked. And that allows me to say the name, a number instead of the name. Show numbers. Click 21.
I'll just share that when show numbers is activated, every link that's on the page has now received a number.
For example, if I want to click on the jobs link here,
Sorry, folks, my video has restarted every time I paused it. I apologize. Just going to bring us forward.
click 21. So now I can open this menu. And now we encounter what is potentially another problem. What you notice is that within this submenu, only the links off to the right are getting numbers, nothing off to the left. And now you see that that kind of changed. So if I wanted to click on, say, benefits, I'm not able to with the number, and the name is also not going to work in this case. So the third way is with a grid. Show grid, 18, click 9. And that's how I would click on benefits. And that grid allows you to get past times where both the name and the number don't work. Now, the easiest way is to click on something is with the name. It's intuitive, it's fast. The second easiest is with a number, but it can be prone to error and it forces you to use this overlay that can be intrusive and cover a lot of the screen. The most difficult way to click things is with that grid. It does allow for a lot of precision, but it takes a lot of time, it breaks your concentration, and it's quite frustrating to use. So preferably, everything can be clicked on with a name. So I hope this short demonstration was helpful in helping you understand how I like to navigate my preferred ways of clicking on things. Thank you very much for listening.
Awesome. I'll pause here and take a quick peek at if there's any questions kind of relating to this kind of process of doing a demonstration like this and what we sort of saw. But essentially, Noah demonstrated 3 of the ways that you can navigate using a speech to text software voice control. And he kind of modeled those 3 methods and why each one works better or worse for him in different contexts. I'm seeing some lovely comments that I've never seen a demo of a voice command software, so this was wonderful to see. I'm really glad to hear that. And I think that that comment alone sort of speaks volumes about what this work really offers us is when we're going beyond just kind of making sure that things work for accessibility through the means of making them compliant. And we're actually like learning from someone who uses assistive technology about how they actually explore the experience and why certain things can be helpful or not. In Noah's case, I think a great example is that, yes, maybe there is a way to click on an element using that least preferred method, that mouse grid method that broke the screen into kind of a graph paper grid. and made it so that he would have to select different numbers to sort of drill down into the element that he wants to select. But that takes a lot of effort and time and energy that is is going to be draining on that user if he's having to do that every single time he interacts with a page. And so it's really helpful to see the weight of that grow and develop through the research that we're doing. Um, that's awesome. I'm seeing lovely, lovely comments. I'm just going to take a look here. Can you add the link to the demo, please? I can, absolutely. Um, I can share that in the method that we can share that with folks. I'll double check on that. I see a question: as moderators of tests, how do you handle novice screen reader users who struggle setting up their device, for example, sharing their screen or sound, adding extensions? That is a great question. So I think one of the things that I would say is um, this kind of ties into something we'll kind of chat about, which is about actually setting up a truly inclusive research session and what that looks like and how to prepare for that. Um, and so the element that I would say we can kind of dive into when we get to it, but I'll say for now is that we need to prepare for those factors being a part of the research, right? So some days assistive technology just might not be working and it may not be operating the way the user wants it to. And they might just be running into tech issue after tech issue. And there are times where if that happens, I have ended a research session early because I would rather not put that strain on the user and just reschedule time with them at a time when they're going to be more set up for success, or we can take some time ahead of time to maybe do a tech check together and make sure everything is working before we dive into doing any sort of research. And that's really how I've navigated that, is to sort of be more proactive in supporting them. Um, to do that proactive support, though, that does mean kind of continuing to build that muscle of understanding how the AT works. For someone like Noah, and I wanted to put this slide up just to give you just a shout out my friend here for the work that he does, but Noah is an example of someone who's an accessibility consultant. He operates in his own practice of sort of doing consulting and research and testing. And so he's somebody that has an expertise on his AT, but he also has an expertise on giving feedback about his AT and actually being a tester and accessibility tester, especially. And so finding um, ways to access folks that have both of that expertise can be really helpful in unlocking a lot of value from these sessions. I know that that can be a barrier that comes into place depending on your organization, how you're actually able to meet with users. And I'm happy to tackle some more questions kind of relating to some of the ways that you can kind of explore working with users, maybe towards the end of our talk today. But I think I will move on for now. I do have, okay, I've seen just a comment in the Q&A, but thank you for your comment, Julianne. Awesome. So this kind of, we've chatted a bit about this already, but essentially to sort of tackle this piece of the preparation for toasting your buns is really to explore the world of assistive tech, finding ways to get more oriented to it by leveraging just any time you can get with AT users, but also just watching videos that we can find online. There's so many that I'm happy to share with folks that are interested that you can tap into and just sort of get an understanding of what different ATs look like, how they function. But when you're actually in research sessions, even if you're starting from zero and you're really not that confident. Thank you so much, Rob, for the call out. Yes, absolutely. Perspective videos can be helpful. That's wonderful. And so there's a link in chat for folks that are not maybe looking at the chat, but that can be helpful. And in the research sessions themselves, letting AT users be the expert, just like Noah was for us in this moment, can be really helpful. And asking for that time in advance of actually getting into research mode to see how their AT works, maybe navigate any page, just not necessarily working on the assumption we're going to do a lot of insight gathering, but maybe we're going to get a building of understanding about the AT, how it works, and what it looks like to actually successfully facilitate research with it. My last point here is kind of related to that piece about learning together, and that is to try to treat growing these skills as something that, again, you do as a collective. something I've seen a lot of success with is having practitioners maybe organize kind of a accessibility research day where everyone is sort of in a role of facilitating, observing, or even piloting research sessions with AT users, and then being able to actually get that practice live and with your team is really helpful. Awesome. All right, so we've talked about number two, lean on AT users as you learn, as a part of your prep, as a part of your journey into this space. Um, all right, so I think the next part really is that we really can't have a burger without meat. No meat, no burger. So if we're tackling that meat of the session, what does the session actually look like? We might be tackling the question of, what is necessary to facilitate truly inclusive research sessions? What do I need to adapt? How do I adapt all my skills and all my methods? And so, for those that are kind of more in the research headspace, something you could think about is, am I setting up my protocol to be adaptable? Am I prioritizing a safe and inclusive experience for AT users? And that kind of touches on the point we were discussing regarding, I forgot the name of who it was who asked the question, but around kind of what you do when things don't go to plan. And that's really what you have to prepare for. So if we're making a research plan, we're maybe writing a list of tasks we want people to go through and show us if they can accomplish those tasks. That might mean that sometimes we have to change the activity on the fly because blockers have happened, because a hidden barrier emerged, and it maybe just shut down the whole activity right there. And so there are trade-offs to kind of continuing to do research despite some of those barriers. You might not get as much feedback about the page itself, but there's still opportunity for learning. And I think where I would lean on that is to remember that you can prepare to be flexible um, by creating kind of a plan for the research session that offers optional tasks, optional pieces that can be explored depending on if there's time. Um, when it comes to blockers, just remember blockers don't have to block learning. So if you can't actually complete an activity because the screen reader or other AT might not work with that element or might not work with that experience, and it's literally preventing any further exploration, well, that's a finding. That part of the experience is not accessible. And here is some of the reasons why. And to understand some of the reasons why, we can investigate side by side. I can say to the user, hey, I see that it's not been working for you here. Can we work together to see what is labeled on the screen, what's not labeled? What are you sort of seeing? Break that down together, investigate together. That is a hugely valuable use of your time in a research session. And then the last point here is just to remember that because we are working on a framework in a world where so much of the digital experiences that people are using aren't really set up to be accessible for them. AT users are often really tolerant to poor experiences that if you were to put that experience in front of maybe a Gen Pop research participant, they would be very critical of, but I've noticed that pattern and that bias emerge where because of that experience, they're less willing to call out things and be critical. And so some aspect of being a facilitator, an inclusive research facilitator, is to go a little bit above and beyond in empowering that critical feedback and really validating that the feedback that you're learning is really helpful and being willing to kind of probe a little bit further. Maybe that can look like you're trying to investigate or trying to lead them to share too much, but at the same time, we're working against a lot of factors that are outside of the room, right? Outside of the session that you're conducting with a participant. And so being more of that advocate for their voice is a really key part of being an inclusive researcher, I would say. This point kind of relates to earlier, but essentially just a reminder again to think about when you do need to pivot, that if you've got those clear research goals about what you want to investigate, what you want to learn, you can use that to kind of guide anywhere that you move forward. So let's say that you know that eventually the experience needs to be built with a chat bot and it's going to look like this or that. And you know that this research is meant to inform that or meant to be a test for that. If the user cannot interact with the page, with the chat bot, maybe they can't do anything on the page, but we can still use our time in the session to explore their ideal state, the dream and solutions that they would like to see, what they would expect, what they would hope for. that would really work well with their assistive technology and with the way that they navigate. So no meat, no burger. We got to get the meat of the session. And that really, the meat of kind of planning and organizing these sessions is to plan to pivot and to plan to be flexible. So here's where we have kind of the basics of our burger. We prepped our ingredients, we toasted our buns, we've got our meat, the no patty, no burger. But if we really want to understand in more detail or kind of go above and beyond a little bit and to making a really, truly inclusive research session, there are a couple more things we can add in. But I also want to offer the reminder here that if you're stopping at this point and you're just trying these three things out in the process of building your confidence, getting started, that's plenty. That's enough to get started. We don't need to have, all the fancy toppings. We don't need to have all the extra special sauces. But if you're excited and you're interested, I'll offer a couple other things that we can think about here. I just have on the screen also the idea that, the cheese in a burger makes everything better. So maybe that's something we can think about. And maybe we'll add a little special sauce. We'll incorporate something interesting that can really lead to a truly impactful research session. So I'll contextualize this again by saying, thinking back to those barriers that people are encountering. And let's say you're kind of done with sort of your initial pass of doing some research, you're confronted with just so much data, so many blockers, so many problems, and you think we have too many findings. I'm not sure how to prioritize. What updates or fixes are most important? I think this is a really key part of doing this type of research, partly because it's related to accessibility and accessibility. If we don't kind of prioritize blockers and things effectively, we might be leaving a group of AT users out of the experience entirely. And it's really important to be mindful of that, but also because um, we have to make sure that the research is constructed in a way that allows us to see what's a priority, what is actually the most important thing. And I think when I'm thinking about how to do that, how to really structure that type of accessibility research that's high impact, is set up for you to know how to prioritize, there are just a couple things that I would say kind of have to think about that maybe differs from some of the user research or UX research that typically um, people are doing in tech organizations and stuff. And that is really to think a little bit differently about things like saturation, sample size. These are sort of words that we throw around a lot in research, but essentially it's just the idea that when you're doing accessibility research, you don't need to meet with as many users to kind of reach that stage of almost enough users to actually um, get 80%, let's say, of the things that are problems or pain points or blockers. And so it's just to say that saturation can kind of be reached a little easier. You don't necessarily need to run a huge study with 15, 20 participants to kind of understand some of those themes. Another kind of part of that is to understand that when you're tracking different numbers and metrics in research, you're doing this with a population that has a different experience, a different way of navigating the world. So if we're thinking about things like metrics, um, some of the ones that might be really impactful in typical research just doesn't quite apply properly when we're doing inclusive research. And one of them, it's a great example, is the time that you spend on a task. That's something that sometimes is tracked in research. But because of that complexity with assistive technology, because of that nuance of there's another, person in the room, there's this AT in the room, it really changes that routine of what is kind of the right amount of time that a task will take. And it's not that helpful to measure that number. But there are measurements like completion of the task being a way to see, okay, was this user actually able to access all the steps that are required to complete this? That's a great metric to track. And then in the organization I worked with for the over 3 years, Babel, one of the metrics that they've built is this AUS score to help quantify and measure assistive technology users' perceived usability of products. So these are also some different metrics and numbers that can kind of be incorporated in your research and just provide that support in knowing how to prioritize. Because when we have certain ways of saying, okay, I can see that it's the screen magnification group that has rated this really poorly on the AUS. Now I have an inkling of, okay, this is a group we need to focus on and understand a bit better how to make the experience better for them. And that can be a guiding light as well. Um, right, sort of in tandem with that is this aspect of how do we empower users to be critical and actually really show the impact and share it. And sometimes that really looks like when someone is navigating through the page and you're watching them kind of come across a stress, a blocker, you might find that um, they're forced to employ workarounds, and they manage to maybe succeed at the task, but at what cost? And so it's really helpful to dig into that, even if users are successful at finishing something or are able to kind of work around something, following up and asking, like, how did that impact you to use that workaround? Did that add fatigue? What was that like for you? And exploring that a little bit. And when you've identified a blocker, there's also the opportunity to leverage those probing questions about how this blocker is impacting you to really help you kind of contextualize their experience and really help bring that voice of the user out aloud into things like quotes and clips that can then support your bigger research narrative as well. Um, and then this last point here is just kind of relating to that completion rate. Even if, we have completed a task for testing purposes, I sometimes have found that I'll ask the user, if we weren't testing today, if we weren't having to make you do this, would you have abandoned this task? Would you have kept going? Or would you have kind of stopped at some point? And oftentimes I'll find out that they would have stopped because the barriers that they were experiencing were so severe that this would have been way too much for them to actually go forward through. And that is also a really helpful distinguishment from doing the testing work and checking everything for the purposes of research doesn't mean that this like level of difficulty and the level of pain that they're experiencing is actually acceptable and okay. And I think that differentiation is really key as well. Um, a lot that we've kind of thrown around research and kind of these different terms for different things in UX research as well. So happy to take a peek here for any questions that are related to that. Um, okay, yeah. How can you encourage AT users, participants to provide more critical feedback while not biasing them against accessibility issues you as a researcher are noticing? I think that's super interesting question. So for example, okay, I see a follow-up. For example, during testing, I noticed that headers were out of hierarchical order. I mentioned it to the participant and he hadn't noticed and didn't care. So I think this is really important. I think this is a super key point, which is that it is also possible that sometimes the things that maybe make the page not compliant or you're aware of as an accessibility practitioner of something that you know isn't really set up correctly and it's not implemented correctly and it doesn't come up for the user, sometimes that also is a finding. And the finding really is that that's an accessibility issue that needs to be solved, but at this stage isn't blocking a user from continuing. And so as a result, it might be one of those things that you do list in the kind of list of fixes or and updates that need to happen, but you kind of recognize that, oh, it doesn't have to be prioritized because it didn't block the user. And so it's really a judgment call there of working with the user to understand how something is impacting them, following up on things. But if they don't care about it and it didn't impact their experience, that's also a learning. And I think that's kind of where this user-centered approach to accessibility research kind of can support, I think, the wider like kind of exchange that you make in using these insights to actually make sure that experiences are working better and leveraging those insights to make improvements. It sometimes might mean that you learn something is, not as much of an issue for the AT user, even though it is actually kind of fundamentally not accessible. And so noticing and prioritizing things to actually center their actual user experience first and foremost kind of shifts that prioritization as well. So many great comments and questions. How do you distinguish accessibility and usability in your reports? Okay, that's a really great question. I would say for that, there's a couple ways that I've seen different practitioners and researchers do this, but I think one of the ways that I find it easiest is to kind of not try to distinguish them too much, but operate more in terms of, I know this is a usability issue, and it actually is usability. It's not like something is not labeled. It's not like something is not compliant. It's that maybe the element is so small that it makes it difficult for um, a user to find it within the page when they're exploring. Maybe this person is a magnification user and they have a limited view of the screen, and it's going to take them a while to find this element, and that causes friction. But that is both kind of accessibility and usability, because it's accessibility to this user who has this way of navigating, and they're not able to use that way of navigating effectively here. But it's not necessarily that the element doesn't have high enough contrast or isn't at all findable. Maybe it is findable. It's just in the way that it's positioned in the page and the way that it's kind of fits within a task flow, it's actually causing friction. And so sometimes for me, I like to think about it as I'm centering the user, I'm centering their experience, and that will sometimes lead to insights that are more of a usability insight and more of an accessibility insight. And the place that that distinguishment matters is more when I share that insight with the people that are going to fix it. Maybe if it's a usability insight, I need to share that with designers. So I do need to make that distinction. But other times, maybe that usability insight needs to be shared with developers. And same for accessibility. That accessibility fix might be something that only developers can really tackle. And so I'm going to frame it appropriately for that group of people to actually empower them to make that fix. Lovely discussion I'm seeing. I'm so excited by that. Um, I'm just at, I think, the time for I think when we would start Q&A, but I don't know if that sounds good to you, Jay, but I'll just maybe go towards my wrap up and then we can
Yeah,
continue with
you're
Q&A.
totally good. You've been doing questions throughout, so feel
Okay,
free to kind of go
wonderful.
however you want.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. So I'll wrap up a little bit of this content and we can continue to dive into the questions. But yeah, just to kind of summarize this piece about what makes things high impact. As you can see from this discussion, there are so many things that we can kind of put into place to really make these sessions high impact. But like I said, that's kind of the extra piece. That's like that would make it really successful and make it that much better. But until we start with our other stages of kind of prepping our ingredients, toasting up our buns, actually prepping the meat of the session, the plan, that stuff is like, I would say, critical. And then, yeah, it would be great if there's some extra stuff and cheese and things. And so I just want you to kind of keep that in mind. This last piece I want to touch on is just, you know, if you are navigating the kind of a most acute version of this, which is that you're in an inclusive research session with the tester who uses an AT, and you start navigating some aspect of the experience, and they pretty much immediately say, oh my gosh, everything is so inaccessible, and the user like couldn't complete any tasks. What do I do now? And that is as we've sort of talked about already, something that is so possible and so normal within accessibility research. It's something that absolutely is like a core part of the experience, is that there are going to be things that happen. And I just kind of want to offer a couple of ways that you can set your stage for inclusive research to make sure that these aspects of the research session don't have a negative impact as much on our participants and on our users. And some of the ways to do that is to really kind of set up expectations to avoid their unnecessary distress. That's things like, not forcing users to navigate through something that is very inaccessible, because that can lead to fatigue, it can lead to stress, but it also isn't actually valuable in you learning more about what will make it a more accessible experience from their end. Instead, I would operate around things like maybe even offering reminders early on, saying things like, if you've tried everything you'd like to try on this task, let me know and we'll stop and talk things through at that stage. Also, things like, it's okay if we don't get through all the activities today. It will be helpful to capture when things don't work too. And so it makes it clear that we aren't just here to do a good job and have everything work and have everything be perfect. That isn't how these sessions often go. And that doesn't mean that that's a failed research session, right? Because when things don't work, that is us also learning and navigating something that we can actually take things away from. Um, Oh, I'm seeing some comments about what step four of the burger was. Step four was just maybe adding the cheese that makes everything better. So, kind of the cheeseburger element. But also, this last piece we're talking about is kind of like the special sauce, the extra stuff that comes into play. And that's kind of what we're tackling now. Um, and yeah, just to wrap up some of those kind of, again, extra stuff that sort of helps us is yeah, kind of grounding everything that you do in the session with if you must pivot, remembering that approach that anything you do, anything that you can learn in the session is an opportunity to think more inclusively, build that deeper empathy and understanding for the AT user and how they navigate and what their experience is. And that counts as inclusive research. So even if you don't get to do any tasks, if nothing on the page gets tested, and all you get to do is dive deeper into how their AT navigates, explore, understand what they wish from this experience or what they would like to see. Those are all really valuable insights as well that you can surface and share and build into how people are building and designing products. And um, I think that's something that I just, yeah, like to remind everyone often throughout this process. Um, We've touched on this already, but just that reminder, yeah, when blocked, we can investigate the ideal. We can discuss opportunities to make the experience work better. We can even kind of move in that more generative, exploratory style. We can sketch ideas together. We can come up with ways to solve problems. So many different things that we can sort of tackle there. Um, I'm just gonna take a quick check here on the Q&A and development teams are new to accessibility. One issue that we come across, we don't find a lot of consistency of information like banners and nested items. Yeah, so I think this is one of those questions that it's kind of in building that more clear understanding about accessibility that I think from the foundational side is super relevant. If you are feeling like, the knowledge and the understanding of those basic foundational ways of making sure elements are built that are compliant and accessible isn't there, I would definitely say that like foundational learning has to happen a little bit before we dive super deep into all of these things. But I think what can be helpful is even trying to have time where you are working maybe with an assistive technology user who has a little bit of that technical experience. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Happy to put you in touch. But there's folks that can speak to that aspect of the development side as well as their screen reader accessibility and how it functions. And so even I found a lot of value comes from having sort of informational sessions where developers are kind of there to sit and talk and learn without the need to structure it as like a particular research session, but just as a way to get oriented a bit more to what they might not really be doing or what they might not really fully understand with how to actually code and programmatically set up elements to be accessible for screen readers, things like that. Um, I'm just taking a look here. If Jay, you have an inkling of any,
So what if we tie that last question? So if you're doing use accessibility research session and something comes up and you're not for sure if it is just with their setup or their
yeah,
expertise, like how do you kind of bridge that where there clearly was an issue in what they were doing. They
yeah.
ran into a barrier, but you're not sure. Maybe you don't have the expertise to know what to do with that.
Yeah, no, and that's I think why I feel like one aspect of it is it's okay that it won't be understood right there in the session. It might be a thing we have to clip that recording, we have to take it away, maybe talk to some different practitioners, create a conversation about it. I think for me, what that looks like is when I put together my report, I'm pulling in those clips of those things that I'm like, hey, there's something going on here. We need to probably investigate a bit further. And I don't stop with my own expertise. I bring in all of the people in the team who are partly maybe responsible for that element, that feature, and bring them into the discussion. Not like, hey, you did a bad job, but more like, hey,
Right.
we can do a little bit of investigation together and treat it more like, hey, like let's get curious about what's going on and try to see what it is. That definitely looks like leveraging knowledge and expertise that are outside of you as well. So I absolutely will lean on developers in my team or designers who have like specifically are very close to that product or that digital experience and see what they know about the history of the elements, what's been going on, get their context, and that can provide a lot of insight too. I feel like a good example of that is when you find maybe that a mobile element is not labeled effectively for screening or something, and you then can ask sort of like, okay, how was this app built? Like, tell me more about the process. And you might come to find out, oh, all these elements were custom built. Okay,
Right.
well, we need to start looking into that. And so that can provide that context for where to start your investigation sometimes as well.
There's a couple general questions, but is there some more content? Like were you gonna finish any?
Just the last page here, which is just me summarizing folks that what we've talked through today is kind of inclusive research with a side of fries. We've got the prepping stage of actually getting kind of familiar oriented. The toast up your buns was kind of all of the work of getting oriented to AT. The actual meat of the burger was actually how are we planning, adapting, and then we talked a bit about some extra stuff we can do to make the session more impactful, help us prioritize, that kind of thing. But that's everything.
So there's kind of a practical, like, if I'm getting started on this, a lot of, how do I find people to do this research with? There
Yeah.
was versions of this, and then kind of maybe similar, I think it might be more approachable a lot to do this remotely. And so any considerations for remote accessibility research?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I would say is for remote, I would say a lot of the time, yes, there is the element of making sure folks can leverage tools like Zoom or other things to sort of set up a remote session. And I would say that trying to figure out what tools are accessible for that. I do think Zoom is up there in terms of its accessibility features and ability to be set up for these kinds of sessions. So I definitely would lean on tools that we kind of know are working well for a majority of people. But when we're actually setting up the remote session, um, some of the ways that I like to set the stage is like some of those things we talked about of making time for a tech check, making time for some of those reminders to set the tone that, we're going to figure out how to make sure that you're comfortable throughout. We're not going to invite distress. We're going to be able to take breaks, pause whenever you need to. Those are all parts of making it a really inclusive environment for research, especially because we're remote and there are lots of aspects of the person's like environment that I might not be privy to, but I have to create a space where they can let me know if there's something that's going on that, yeah, I can't see, and I can make sure that we can adjust for that. And that sometimes might mean we end the session early, we stop, things like that. Regarding actually getting in touch with AT users to do this research, I think this is probably it's the biggest challenge, the elephant in the room for sure. But I would say there are lots of ways to kind of either do this on more of an organization level with tools and platforms that have access to AT users. Happy to share more there. But also, kind of what I kind of mentioned, there are ways to find accessibility testing, research consultants, folks with their own lived experience as AT users and expertise as accessibility. They're all over LinkedIn. I am happy to point you in the direction of many of these folks that have that expertise. I'm sure many of them are here with us in this conference as well. And so it's just to say that the expertise is out there. It does feel sometimes daunting to figure out how to connect with this kind of community of people to do this research, but happy to kind of like, yeah, continue that conversation offline because I know it's a bigger thing to tackle than we can today in this call, but happy to support if I can.
And there's a comment of, make sure, you pay them, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Oh my God. 1000%. Yes, Noah was paid for his demonstration today, of course, because his value and his expertise is, yeah, undeniable. So we thank Noah for his contribution for sure.
one final question. Do you know of anywhere that there's an example of a report after accessibility research? Like what findings and how people structure those reports or
Yeah. That's a tough one because I would say that a lot of the work that I did was primarily kind of for companies and their own research is their own data kind of
they don't
thing.
want to publish it, right?
Absolutely,
So
yeah. But I think honestly, Jay, that's a good call out to me that that could be something that could be a good resource because I'd be happy to maybe put together something that's like the template of what it looks like when you actually do it. I know there's some folks here in the call, I'm sure, with us who have some experience with that. And if there's anyone who has links or kind of templates or formats that they found successful and would like to share, feel free to do that as well. But if you would like kind of to, yeah, continue that conversation, feel free, please, to connect with me on LinkedIn or over email at kavana.research@gmail.com. And yeah, I'm happy to share maybe the grayed out version of what that kind of looks like and something more concrete maybe down the road. That would be awesome.